My brothers and sisters, my dearest children, September 30th is a day recognized in Canada as the Orange Day or the Orange Shirt Day. And amongst the Imams in Canada, this Jum'ah is to be dedicated to honor and acknowledge the indigenous people, the true owners of the land in which we are living right now, which is called Canada. And the story behind the orange shirt goes back into one of the survivors of the residential schools who at the beginning of one of the school years was given a shirt to wear by her grandmother, and she was stripped from that shirt and replaced with the uniform to be worn in that school, the residential school. These schools, which unfortunately were operated by the Canadian government and the church's system at that time. In these residential schools, the children were exposed to assimilation, were stripped from their own identity as indigenous people, and they were abused both physically, emotionally, sexually, and as a result of that, many of them have died, and approximately between 4,000 to 6,000 of indigenous children died throughout the schools that were operating from the late 18th centuries to the 1996, which is not too far in the present time. Now the question comes here, why do we need to be concerned about this? And what's in it to us as Muslims? We need to be concerned about this because, first of all, we are standing and living in the land of the indigenous people. This is their own land. This is their home. Unlike what was promoted by the colonialists, the first settlers who come from outside this land to claim that this is a land that has no people, no culture, and we're gonna be establishing a civilization for people who are running away or expanding from Europe. And this perception, which is applying the ideology of colonialism or imperialism, the concept of taking over people's land and taking advantage of its resources, is not new to the Muslim Ummah in general. As Muslims, we also were subjugated to this ideology in which by the Muslim Ummah was divided among European nations, and the resources of the Ummah were depleted, and the culture of the Ummah was attempted to be stripped from the Muslims living in their own land. But because of the rahmah of Allah Azza wa Jal, and because of the power of the deen that we are applying in our life, and because of the promise of the mighty Allah Azza wa Jal to protect this ummah from any attack from outside, because this ummah would not be perished, would not be vanished, would not be finished as other civilizations who existed on earth from before have vanished and extinct and finished. This is an ummah that follows a deen that Allah Azza wa Jal have made to be the final revelation that would be maintaining the livelihood of people on earth until the end of life. These are facts, needs to be acknowledged by the old generation like myself, but primarily to the new generation who are being part an integral part of the society in which we're living in. And bear with me, sometimes I will be addressing that generation because I have high hopes and expectations on the new generation because of the potentials they have, because of what is waiting for them and as the carriers of the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal. And therefore they need to be educated, they need to be aware, they need to understand what's their responsibility and role. When it comes to seeing injustice, we stand up. We stand up because Allah the Mighty had said to us, كُونُوا قَوَّامِينَ بِالْقِسْطِ شُهَدَاءَ لِلَّهِ. Be people who stand for justice. Be people who stand for justice, because this is something that Allah Azza wa Jal the Mighty have forbid on Himself. Ya ibadi, O my servants, in the Hadith Qudusi, I have forbidden injustice on myself and made it forbidden on my servants. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to translate these meanings into real actions. Before his bi'tha, before he became a prophet of Allah Azza wa Jal, he was involved into what's known historically as Hilf al-Fudul. And Hilf al-Fudul was initiated as a result of an incident that took place in Mecca. What is Mecca? Mecca was the center of business in the Arabian Peninsula. It was the hub of the caravans that commutes between Yemen and which is an extension to what comes from the Far East to the Bilad al-Sham and what is extension of that in Europe. So Mecca was the hub of business, was the center of business in the Arabia. As a result of that, many caravans will be going through Mecca, and Mecca becomes so rich. And at the same time, because of the lack of the principles and the values, there was a lot of injustice happening in Mecca. There were classifications in Mecca. There were the class of the rich, the masters, the dominant, the powerful, who are controlling everything around them. And it happened, a man from Zubayd, a town in Yemen, happened to be traveling into Mecca, and he was taken, his rights were taken by Al-As ibn Wa'il, who was one of the leaders of Mecca, and was not able to confront that thug from the thugs of Mecca. Went to the Haram and spoke in public and said, I need someone to stand for me. I am not from the locals of this town. I am not from the masters or the thugs of this city. And the one who heard him was Az-Zubayr. And then Az-Zubayr, as a result of that, went back to the Quraysh, and they created a coalition whereby they were giving covenant that no zalim should be resigning in Mecca, and if any persons were to be treated unjustly, then that person will be getting their rights. And they call it, as a result of that, Hilf al-Fudul. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was proud for being in this Hilf even before Islam. And he said that I am willing to endorse such a Hilf, such a covenant, such a coalition, because it is calling for the good of the people in the society. And when the Sahaba returned back from Abyssinia, Jabir ibn Abdullah said that we were sitting with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he said to them, tell me of something unusual you have witnessed in Abyssinia. And they said to him, Ya Rasulullah, And one day we were sitting and an old woman walked with the bucket of water on her head, and a young man came and pushed her and broke that bucket of water and was laughing. And that old woman stood up and said, by Allah, in a day in which I will be standing between the hands of Allah Azza wa Jal, and you will be standing between the hands of Allah Azza wa Jal, I will be taking my right from you. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, Sadaqat, Sadaqat, Sadaqat. He repeated that 3 times. كيف يقدس الله أمة لا يؤخذ لضعيفها من شديدهم. How Allah Azza wa Jal will be blessing an ummah, a nation, that who the du'afa, the weak, would not be empowered against those who are tyrant in any society. And in another incident, a man from Arsh, one of the tribes in Mecca, happened to do business in Mecca with Abu Jahl. And we all know who is Abu Jahl, the father of all ignorance. And the man was furious because Abu Jahl would not be paying him his money. And that man went from one leader of Mecca to another, hoping that someone will be empowering him, will be interceding with Abu Jahl la'natullahi alayhi, so that he will give him back his money. And then people around the Kaaba were trying as usual to make fun of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Said to him, do you see that man? And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam was in the corner of the Kaaba. They said to him, go to that man, he will be able to get you right from Abu Jahl. Amr ibn Hisham, the leader of Mecca, one of the leaders of Mecca, the most powerful thug of the thugs of Mecca. And then that man approached the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam immediately, without reflection, said to him, yes, indeed. And he walked with that man to the house of Amr ibn Hisham, Abu Jahl, and knocked the door, and Abu Jahl came out rushing with yellow face out of fear. And he said to him, this man behind, the Prophet ﷺ said to him, this man behind me needs his haqq. And Abu Jahl la'natullahi alayhi, yes, I will give him his haqq right now before you move away. And he got his right from Abu Jahl la'natullahi alayhi. People of Mecca were surprised. They were astonished. How could this happen? And then later on, Abu Jahl la'natullahi alayhi reported to them that when he heard the voice of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he was terrified. The fear was thrown into his heart. And he said, when I opened the door, I saw a malak, or an animal, behind the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, who was willing to attack me if I were not to respond to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam request. Now these stories would be giving us an indication that indeed injustice is untolerable in the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal. And there are principles. There are principles that needs to be observed and be mindful about in our life. And justice needs to be implemented, whether within the Muslim community or within the society in general. As it happened once in the Prophet ﷺ's life, when a shield was stolen and a Jew was accused about it, and then Allah Azza wa Jal, above 7 heavens, revealed the Quran to expose the truth that the one who is mazloom is the Jew, and the one who is zalim is one of the Ansar. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam exposed that truth and delivered the ayat that delivers the justice and the principles of haqq that in the Quran will be recited until the day of judgment. Now we do stand and shoulder with the indigenous people. We acknowledge that their land was taken away from them. We acknowledge that a genocide was exercised systematically against these indigenous people who were living in their own land, have their own civilization. This was not an empty land as it was promoted. There were people living with civilization. They had businesses, they had centers, they had cities, they had civilization. They had connection with the land in which they're living in. And it's those who came from outside who deliberately have fought against them and caused famine and caused diseases to be spread, and millions of people were died as a result of the aggression that the indigenous people were exposed to in the land of North America in general. Now that has been said, our responsibility is to expose the truth and endorse the reconciliation in what so-called Truth and Reconciliation Commission, CRT, TRC. And in this, we need to expose any injustice that is happening around the globe. Any injustice that is happening, that happened in the history. And nowadays, as Muslims, we can acknowledge and we need to acknowledge. And when I say that we need to acknowledge, I know many of us are aware that there is a genocidal war happening in Gaza. And there's another war being waged right now in Lebanon. And there's also an unjust war happening in Sudan. And there's also an unjust treatment to the people of Myanmar happening. And also in Kashmir, in almost every corner of the Muslim world, there is injustice happening. Now, do we exercise the truth and reconciliation when it comes to see what is happening in the Muslim Ummah? Are we exposing the truth, the real truth of what is really happening to the Muslim Ummah? Or we're following blindly what is being promoted by the colonialists who try to promote lies? And up to nowadays, unfortunately, lies are being promoted by leaders of the world and still blindly supporting the zalimeen and unjustly treating the mazloom. And I'm not talking about the global leaderships of the non-Muslim Ummah. We're talking about the Muslim Ummah in general. We're in count close to 2 billion in population. Where are we from what is happening and has been happening for close to a year now in Gaza? Has there been any Muslim leader or Muslim country, or in a broader token, any country on earth, has they been able to deliver a bottle of water to the people who are struggling to be able to quench their thirst? Has they been able to deliver medication to eradicate these diseases that are erupting once again in Gaza, which extinguished completely from the earth? Are they doing something to prevent this genocidal war from being committed against civilians who are resigning in tents, who are being bombarded with heavy bombs? Is anyone doing anything to prevent the attacks on safe zones as they're supposed to be safe zones? Is anyone doing anything to prevent the bombardment of the United Nations facilities who have given up sending any of their employees in Gaza because it is unsafe for them to be able to operate in Gaza? Have we thought one day we'll be standing in front of the mighty Allah Azza wa Jal? As this old woman said to that young man, and the mighty Allah Azza wa Jal will be giving the haqq to every person whose haqq has been taken away from them. Did we prepare for ourselves as individuals or as leaders? Did we prepare for ourselves an answer to what the mighty Allah Azza wa Jal will be asking us definitely in the day of judgment, when He will tell us that X was hungry, X was sick, Y was madloom? What have you done to quench the thirst of that person? What have you done to stop the hunger of that person? What have you done to aid that person who's bleeding? What have you done to rescue the person who is captive? What have you done to prevent the dhulm and injustice that is happening to your brothers and sisters? What is happening to the Muslim Ummah who's now is living intoxication? We're like intoxicated people, we're as if we are unaware or unconscious of what is happening to the Ummah in general. Let's be ready to a day like this, where when we'll be standing between the hands of the mighty Allah Azza wa Jal. Everyone is accountable for what they are able to do. We are, as a community in North America, have a lot to do in exposing the truth and calling for the reconciliation for those who have been treated unjustly, indiscriminately of their cultural background or faith background or the skin of their color, the color of their skin. We need to promote that and push for it. We need to combat the lying, the deliberate lying, and the lying propaganda against the unjustly treated people around the globe. We need to be on the right side by promoting the truth. Be engaged in whatever organization of advocacy you are able to support and engage in by promoting the truth. It's not a choice for you anymore to be passive. That's not a choice. For Allah's sake, we have passed that choice. We no longer have a choice to be engaged or not to be engaged. We're seeing the knife above the necks of ourselves. One day, we could be possibly subjugated to aggression as a result of our silence and not standing for haqq and justice to those who are going through injustice. May Allah Azza wa Jal the Mighty have rahmah on the Muslim Ummah and have rahmah on those who have been treated unjustly, and help us to be able to stand for haqq. فإنه على كل شيء قدير. وأقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه فيا فوز المستغفرين. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور انفسنا وسيئات اعمالنا من يهده الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا ان الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا ايها الذين امنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى ال محمد كما صليت على ابراهيم وعلى ال ابراهيم وبارك اللهم على محمد وعلى ال محمد كما باركت على ابراهيم في العالمين انك حميد مجيد اللهم ان عبيدك ابناء عبيدك ابناء امائك نواصينا يا رب بيدك ماض يا رب فينا حكمك عدل يا رب فينا قضاؤك نسألك اللهم بكل اسم هو لك سميت به نفسك أنزلته في كتابك أو علمته أحدا من خلقك أو استأثرت به في علم الغيب عندك بأن تجعل القرآن العظيم ربيع قلوبنا يا رب اللهم اجعله جناء لهمومنا وأحزاننا يا رب العالمين اللهم نسألك بأنك أنت الرحمن الرحيم في هذا اليوم المبارك وفي هذه الساعة الفضيلة بأن تسقع عطش المسلمين وأن صد رمق جوع المسلمين وأن تفك أسر المأسورين اللهم نسألك بجلالك بأن تقر أعيننا بالصلاة آمنين مطمئنين في المسجد الأقصى فإنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم أفرغ على قلوب إخواننا المرابطين والصابرين في أرض فلسطين وفي غير فلسطين فإنك على كل شيء قدير. Oh Allah, we ask you by your mercy to restore justice and peace on earth, Ya Rabb al-Alameen. We ask you in this blessed day, in this blessed hour, to quench the thirst of those who are thirsty, to feed those who are hungry, and to heal those who are sick, and to free those who are captive. فإنك على كل شيء قدير. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وأقم الصلاة.